Einstein wrote it down for Dialogue 80.
Dialogue 80, WLAD.
This is Dialogue 80, Greater Danbury's only telephone talk show on WLAD. Dial 792-8080 for Dialogue 80 on Radio 80 WLAD.
And today on Dialogue 80, Movie Madness with Peter Michaels. We're going to talk about Michaels' movie Madness. It's a pleasure to have you here as my guest today on Dialogue 80. It's the first time you've been here, and let's talk about it. Michaels' movie Madness.
We encompass fantastic films, science fiction, and fantasy. There's something beyond them, a lot more than horror.
Dracula.
They're literate. As opposed,
Frankenstein.
Which is all based on classic.
But wait a minute now. Does classic make it any less scary?
But what I'm trying to say is in these movies, there's so much poetry to them. Like I said, I've got a lot of people say, we won't watch these shows because of gore. And I said, my God, have you ever seen Bela Lugosi and Dracula? Have you ever seen Frankenstein? And the response would be, I don't want to be scared, or I don't want to be hammed out. That many of these movies are corny, they're inept. And then we got some phone calls from people that said, the first time I saw this movie, I can't believe that there's depth in them.
All right, so you're saying that it's more than just scary. It's more than just being frightened. There is more to it.
Yes, I believe so.
Now, if you talk about science fiction, I'll agree with you. Certainly in science fiction, there is more. There is more depth to it. But I'm trying to think of redeeming features in Frankenstein, redeeming features in Dracula. I'm having a real hard time coming up with some, but please correct me. Tell me.
Frankenstein, for example, written by Mary Shelley when she was 19. It was directed by a gentleman named James Whale, who was certainly, I would say, a genius in the dictionary sense. He took what would have been a mundane monster kills villagers and put poetry to it. Boris Karloff took a role that Lugosi had turned down for various reasons. He actually was up for it because in the book, the monster had dialogue. And they were told that nobody could do a role by grunting and make it anything pathetic or any sympathy. And this man took a nothing role and made, to this day, people are still watching it. It's a character with depth, with 3 dimensions.
Hunchback of Notre Dame, another one.
There again, you've got Victor Hugo's novel. And Lon Chaney Sr., Charles Laughton also played it excellently. What I think is unusual and great about some of these films is our interpretations of the films have changed over the years. Where you can take House of Dracula, which was the very end of the horror cycle in 1946 with the Universal films. And they weren't out to make anything but money. You had Dracula, Frankenstein, a female hunchback, a wolfman. But 25, 30 years later, and there's poetic value because we reinterpret them.
Okay, now, let me just stop you right here. You say that 25, 30 years ago they were made to make money. Are you suggesting that the people who produced The Shining, Poltergeist, The Exorcist were not interested in the bucks? I had no problem with their doing it for that reason. But tell me about the redeeming qualities of The Shining or Poltergeist or The Exorcist. Rosemary's Baby. I mean, these movies, the Hitchcocks, The Birds, the other movie that, to this day, when I go into a shower, I look to be sure I'm alone in the shower stall.
Psycho.
Psycho. And why do they bring back Psycho 2? So many of these movies. Wasn't there also The Exorcist 2? And if there hasn't been a Shining 2 or a Poltergeist 2, there probably will be. I'm not talking about science fiction. That's a whole other category. What about Jaws? Jaws 1, Jaws 2, Jaws 3. So money is a big part of this. I don't believe that they're doing it for the poetic value. I don't think they're doing it because...
Well, you're talking about current films as well.
But you said 25, 30 years ago it was done for yes, money, and it's different now. Let me take a minute, okay? I'll give you the opportunity to disagree with me if you want to. We want to hear from people out there who love going to these kinds of movies, who really have a good time, who enjoy them. And some of them certainly have redeeming features. If you just want to go and get scared, that's okay too. Oh, what fun we're having today with Peter Michaels, who's the host of Movie Madness. You know, one of the nice things that Peter did was he brought along with him some clips, so you'll be able to hear some clips of Dracula. Dracula, you tell us when we're ready to go to hear Dracula.
Well, before we do, I would like to respond to your last thing.
Yes, I would like very much for you to do that.
time is the only thing that proves what a classic is. Now, when I say so many of these movies were out to make bucks, but 25, 30 years have gone by, time has proven their value. You know, that sort of answers that question.
Okay. There is no problem with saying there's nothing wrong. This is America, and this is a capitalistic country, and for all its problems and faults, we love it. And certainly, if one can benefit financially from whatever one is doing, I have no problem with that, and I don't think anybody would. But to say that there are redeeming social values to some of the movies we've talked about, I have a hard time in dealing with that. Certainly The Elephant Man, one could say one could be frightened by it, but if you think about that movie as a movie that truly, clearly had a message, Mask with Cher, those kinds of movies might have frightened, but they also taught important lessons. AIDS today is teaching important lessons to people and how to care for people who are dying, who have serious, terrible problems, their appearance, their inability to take care of themselves. So those kinds of issues. But I find it difficult to stretch that to include Dracula and Frankenstein, etc., etc. Now, do you want to go to a clip of Dracula now? Would you like to do that?
Sure, let's go there.
Let's have our engineer do that for us. A clip from Dracula.
The first great fight film of the talking era was, of course, Dracula. 3 sinister syllables forever synonymous with Bela Lugosi. I am Dracula. I bid you welcome.
Scary, scary, scary. Okay, for people who loved Boris Karloff, and later on in the program we do have a short clip of Boris Karloff talking about Frankenstein and talking about the Wolfman, so hopefully we'll be able to include that. Let's take some calls. Hi, I'm Rhoda Down, you're on Dialogue 80.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to make a comment regarding that you expressed that there were really no social values in the horror movies. As a doctoral candidate in psychology, I take exception to that fact, as many of my professors have indeed used horror films as a classic psychological study. Frankenstein, for example, deals with the frailties of human nature, the innocence of youth. There are many areas that are not only social values, but moral and ethical, as well as psychological.
Okay, I appreciate your call. Peter Michaels, you have a caller who agrees with you.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that.
What about Rosemary's Baby? The kind of movies, you say the classic. I told you about The Shower. I mean, that is absolute true for me.
Robert Bloch, by the way, who wrote Psycho, was on our show quite often. Speaking about Forrest Ackerman and about the film. And now there's one of the most intelligent men. But oddly enough, I believe Mrs. Bloch, Robert Bloch's wife, has never read Psycho. She's afraid to read it. Most of these people who write and do the bizarre films are the most sane, calm people you could possibly imagine. But again, as I say, most of the films that I can really discuss with some intelligence are the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Okay, so those are the films that you do play for people, and let's talk about what you do, because people are able to watch these films on Friday nights. Tell us about Movie Night.
As I said, we have Dracula. Also, we do an overview of Bela Lugosi's career and life, showing clips from a film called The Midnight Girl from 1925. Also, we have an interview with Bela Lugosi Jr., and we visit Mr. Lugosi's grave in Holy Cross Cemetery in Hollywood.
On Halloween?
No, on his death day, which was August 16th. And we see much of Forrest Ackerman's collection concerning Bela Lugosi.
Do you go at night or do you go during the day?
During the day.
Okay. So you're not trying to add a lot of hype to this?
No, I do jokes because it's expected of me. I break my nose on doors, but I'm very serious. I will not make fun of the films or the people that sacrifice most of their lives to them.
Okay, and I don't know if we should refer to them as heroes or stars. Would you? I think they do, Frankenstein, and there's a long, long list. Of all of them, who's your favorite?
I have to say Boris Karloff for personality. He died February 2nd, 1969. I was a boy, and I carried his obituary in my wallet for 2 years. I was saddened. We felt like we lost a friend. And I would say because not only as an actor, but as a person.
All right, now, of all the roles he played, because he played many roles, Wolfman?
No, that was Lon Chaney Jr.
Aha, okay. I'm glad you told me that. I remember now.
The original 3 Frankensteins, Bride of Frankenstein and Son of Frankenstein. Plus, he did many serious roles in Tower of London. And one of his last roles, Targets, which was directed by Peter Bogdanovich, in which he played a character not unlike himself. which did have social value. It had to do also with a horror actor and the Dallas assassinations, the lunatic on top of the building, which is a beautiful role, again, underrated, because it had Boris Karloff in it. None of these actors, except for Frederick March, who I did know and lived in New Milford, was the only actor to ever win an Oscar for Best Actor in a horror picture, which was Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. It's, except for special effects, which is not too special today before its overuse, those are the things that win awards.
And, of course, there is a category for special effects. But when you think of someone like Boris Karloff, who played those kinds of roles, there are many actors who don't want to be typecast. They really prefer to break out and to do other things. And it's difficult for them. James Bond, I don't even remember the
Sean Connery.
Well, he was one. There were several people, but he probably was associated more, Sean Connery, with James Bond, and was tired of it. He wanted to do other things. And yet, every time I see him in something else, I think how much better I thought he was and how much more I enjoyed him. Now, what about Boris Karloff? He's no longer alive. We're not able to ask him those kinds of questions. I wonder if there were other roles offered to him. I wonder how he felt about continuing to play a Frankenstein. And we're on 792-8080 today on Dialogue 80. Take a minute to think about that one. Hi, I'm Rhoda Down, and you're on Dialogue 80.
Why are the movies always changed from the book, like Stephen King? I read every one of his books. The Shining, Christine, they're completely different from the book, the endings. Why?
As far as why the films are different than the books, I can only give you Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho. He was never offered to write Psycho, Psycho 2, Psycho 3, Psycho 4, and I said, why? Is it because it would be two checks, characters created by Robert Bloch and screenplay by Robert Bloch? And he said, no, I'm over 40. People don't like that. As you remember, even My Fair Lady, Julie Andrews, she did not make it in the movies. People don't like the original people. They want their cousin. They want who's coming up in the... And that's why those films are basically changed, because the writers are not included.
Well, that's very sad when you think about it, and there are many authors who have a real problem with that, but maybe if the check is big enough, then it makes them feel a little better. Hi, I'm Rhoda Down, you're on Dialogue 80.
Yes, good afternoon, Rhoda.
How are you today?
Oh, just fine, thank you.
Are you a fan?
I most assuredly am the most avid fan of monster, science fiction, and all of the above.
Okay, which is your favorite?
Sci-fi.
All right, any particular one?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I particularly care for the older versions of some of what they consider to be classics. The Day the Earth Stood Still, This Island Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Forrest J. Ackerman, by the way, created the term sci-fi. And each one of those movies you mentioned, he owns the relics, the spaceships, which you will see on my show. As far as science fiction, I would like to also mention, besides Isaac Asimov, on our show, A.E. Van Vogt, who wrote the classic Slan in the 50s.
Let me ask you about Isaac Asimov.
Yes.
What about him? Does he have any input at all into the movies that are based on the books that he's written? Do you know?
Not too much. He does do some work. He doesn't like to leave New York. He won't go out for anything. But of science fiction, I like to say Isaac Asimov is one of this museum where I talked about Forrest, one of his biggest backers. And he's racking his brain saying, why doesn't anyone want this? What's wrong with people? And he believes, by the way, that science fiction and Forrest Ackerman and these films, which he mentioned, Day the Earth Stood Still, had more to do with today's space program than any scientist, because imagination comes first.
That's right. I didn't know that Mr. Michaels had a show. Now that I do, I certainly will make certain that if I'm not at home, I at least can catch a show at a later day.
Thank you very much, sir. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Rhoda Down, and you're on Dialogue 80.
Hi, you talked about Rosemary's Baby and other movies maybe turning into classics. These movies are classics, Rhoda. Psycho and Rosemary's Baby? I don't know what you're talking about. You're not giving these films a chance. I think you kind of went in with a biased view, and I'm a little upset.
Okay, that's fine. What about The Birds? Do you include that in that same category?
I would. Just, from film technique, just from that standpoint, it's a classic.
Tell me about some of your favorites.
Oh, God. Like you said, Psycho, Frankenstein, that was on Michael's Movie Madness a couple weeks ago. I mean, these are classics.
Or do you take a shower without checking it out first? I'm serious. I still look first before I go into the shower. Let's ask our guest today. What do you think, Peter Michaels?
Well, I would like to say something. I said that many of these films have redeeming social values, but don't get me wrong here. The first thing about these films are their fun.
Wait a minute. What kind of fun was there in Psycho? What kind of fun in Rosemary's Baby? What kind of fun in The Birds? I never said those.
You keep mentioning those movies. I don't even show those movies, although I love Psycho. I think Psycho was brilliantly directed.
But you're talking about fun.
Do you ever go to an amusement park?
Sure.
Have you ever gone on a roller coaster?
Sure.
And you find it more fun to be physically frightened than psychologically? Well, that's your thing, you know.
Or I never drink wine.
I'm Rhoda Down, and you just heard another clip, Peter Michaels. Who was that?
Who was it? That was Boris Karloff in the middle of a sentence here, folks.
Saying, I never drink wine?
Yes, quoting Bela Lugosi from the 1931 Dracula.
And the second part of that should have been, but I drink blood. That's what it should have been, but it wasn't.
You know, of Boris Karloff, you asked before, and I never answered, what he thought about these films. Was he capable of doing other things? Boris Karloff was remarkably personable. He enjoyed what he was doing. If he'd lived to be 100, he would have been happy. More than that, he was a nice man. He used to call the monster his friend, and he meant that not in any humorous way. He was happy for the recognition, whether he was typecast or not.
And how long does the program last?
Tonight's show will be 2 hours.
All right. So you don't really see the complete movie?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
And all of the other things that you talked about as well?
Very quick. We try to get to the point.
No commercials?
No commercials, nothing.
Is this non-profit?
Yes, it is.
So you don't get paid to do this?
Not a penny.
Not a penny. Just you do a labor of love? And we hope that a lot of people are going to watch that tonight and every Friday night?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And except, let me tell you, Tuesday, we're also running Frankenstein at 7 p.m. just for your audience in green tint. Hasn't been seen in 57 years.
And you get to pick out the movies and edit them?
Oh, yes.
And
that's why it's called Michael's Movie Madness.
And it's called Michael's Movie Madness. Comcast, channel J23 tonight at 8:30. Do we have another quick clip that we can go out with, Danny Mulvihill?
It's alive! It's alive!
What is that? Tell us about that one.
That's Colin Clive screaming it's alive. The Karloff Frankenstein coming to life. That's the end of that clip, actually.
Okay, and we will have the opportunity to be scared in a very positive way.
And also see Forrest Ackerman's collection.
And see the collection, and we hope that a lot of people will do that by starting something new on Friday nights for you if you haven't done this before. Comcast, channel J23, 8:30, Friday night. Will you come back, Peter Michaels, and do it again?
If you ask me.
I sure will, and we hope that people will indeed watch tonight. Remember, we're on every day, Monday through Friday, 12:15 to 1, Dialogue 80 on WLAD.
This is Larry King. Join me for fascinating guests in Open Phone America tonight after 11. That's the Larry King Show on Radio 80, WLAD.